Hello and welcome. My name is Steve Wright. I'm delighted to be your host today. I'm a volunteer here at PICCASO and we have got an excellent panel coming up. Like many of you, I care deeply about building a stronger, more practical and connected privacy, security, compliance and data governance profession. So thank you for joining us today for this PICCASO and Dastra sponsored webinar. This session today is all on Data Use and Access Act, or DUAA, and in particular, the new requirements for organizations to have formal process for handling data protection complaints. So before we begin, I just wanted to mention a bit about PICCASO. As you know, PICCASO is only possible because our people, like all of us here today across our community, choose to contribute. And we need your help to make PICCASO an international success. So please get involved, submit your articles, your white papers, share practitioner insights, or nominate yourself for best team or product at the European PICCASO Awards, which is being held in London on the 2nd of December. Or maybe perhaps host a workshop or support a lab, sponsor an event, or simply help us to connect good people doing important work across privacy, InfoSec, compliance, culture, AI, strategy, and operations. So this session matters because the DUAA is not just a technical change to the data protection law. It is part of a wider shift from privacy as a policy exercise to privacy as an operational discipline. This is why it's so exciting. For many years, organizations have been able to demonstrate accountability through policies, privacy notices, registers, DPIAs, training, and all the other kind of good stuff. All of that still matters, but the real test is what happens when an individual raises a concern. Can the organization recognize it as a data protection complaint? Can it route out to the right team? Can it acknowledge it, investigate it, keep the individual updated, record the outcome and learn from it? And can it do that in a consistent way, not just once, not just a one-off, but actually at scale? And this is what we're here to talk about. This is where accountability, the rubber hits the road. So it's worth just mentioning a little bit of context about the DUAA. So it received royal assent in 2025 and is being brought into force in stages. One of the most practical and immediate changes is the new complaints handling procedure, which we're focused on today, introduced through Section 103 of the Act, which inserts a new Section 164A into the Data Protection Act 2018. The ICO has made it clear that these new complaints handling procedures must come into force by the 19th of June. Yes, we've already passed that deadline. From that date, controllers must have the processes in place for dealing with the data protection complaints. Now, many of us as DPOs would already have those. But what does this mean in practical terms? Can you provide individuals with a clear and accessible way to raise a data protection complaint? Can you acknowledge that complaint within 30 days? Can you take appropriate steps to investigate that with undue delay? Can you keep the complainant informed about progress and the outcome, and tell the individual how to escalate the matter, including the ICO, if they're not totally satisfied? So while the legal wording may appear straightforward, the operational implications are significant. So this is not obviously just a DPO issue. It touches customer services. It touches HR, legal, compliance, cybersecurity, marketing, procurement, records, etc., etc. So a complaint may not arrive literally labeled as data protection complaint. It actually, and in my experience, this is how they often come through. It comes through via a call center or a HR grievance, and it can be disguised or a DSAR response. It might come as a result of a cyber incident, a customer email, or even a social media post. That's why today's conversation is focused on turning regulatory change into operational reality. So we are very fortunate to be joined here by three excellent speakers who all bring different perspectives on this highly complex, but seems straightforward on the outside, but I think it's a lot more to it. So first, I am delighted to welcome Barry Gibbon, Group Head of Privacy and Data Protection at Cantor Fitzgerald. Barry brings a deep practitioner experience of running privacy and data protection in a complex regulated environment where governance, accountability, and escalation really matter. So thank you for joining us, Barry. Second, we have Charlie Gretton, who is currently National Account Executive at Dastra. Charlie brings technology, workflow perspective, how organizations can move from manual to fragmented ownership to more structured evidence-based operations, and himself once a DPO. And finally, I'm very pleased to welcome Janine McKelvey, who is also a volunteer at PICCASO as a PICCASO advisory board member with many years in data and AI compliance experience for multinationals, most recently as General Counsel and Privacy and Ethics Officer at BET, which is where I met you, I think, Janine. Janine brings a senior legal privacy and ethics perspective from one of the UK's most significant and complex organizations where complaints, trust, accountability, and operational resilience are not just theoretical issues, they are daily realities. So, over the session, first of all, make notes. Ask your questions, please, audience. Bring your questions to us, okay? This is your opportunity to ask the experts. And during this session, next 40-odd minutes, we will explore the DUAA, the complaint requirements, what it really means, where organizations are likely to be exposed, and what does good look like in practice. And this is how privacy teams can use this moment to strengthen our governance, our workflow, our accountability. So I will try my best as host moderator for this panel to keep the discussion practical. But we're not simply here to admire the legislation. We are here to understand what needs to happen inside your organization. So my first question to the panel is, what does the new DUAA complaints requirements really change for organizations? Is this just another policy update, or is it a genuine operational shift? I'll open to my panel. Who wants to go first?
Should ladies go first on this one?
Go ahead.
So I'll start. I think this is both a policy and a procedural change, and importantly, it's an accountability change as well. So yes, I think you will need to update your policies because we're not just talking about DSARs and managing DSARs anymore. We're talking about handling complaints. Now, for lots of big organizations, they may already have a process in place to handle data-related, data compliance-related and data protection-related complaints. And I know at BT, we definitely had both. But for some organizations, this might be a completely new concept to have to deal with and to think through. And as you mentioned, Steve, typically complaints are dealt with in customer service departments, maybe with HR, maybe the security team. But now the real question is around things like recognizing when you're receiving a complaint that actually needs to be triaged and dealt with by people with data protection experience, making sure you're keeping to those deadlines, making sure that you're reporting both out to the individual who's made the complaint, speaking to the right people who may be able to help you address the query or the complaint, and reporting inwards, internally as well, and potentially upwards sometimes around patterns of behavior that you're seeing. So there is a policy change in that you do need to update your policies to say that people, how you will deal with complaints, and give them, for example, a particular preferred route for them to submit those complaints. Of course, the complaints could come in through any route, but try and kind of manage that. But at the same time, you need to look at your processes. How are you working with your complaints department? Do they know what they need to do? How are you if you're going to receive a large volume of these, are you automating some of them, or how are you logging them? How are you doing sessions where you're sitting down and learning sort of every month, looking at, well, what does it look like? Where are we getting most of these complaints from? Is there actually an issue here that needs to be dealt with? So there's a procedural bit. And where the legislation has changed is that individuals are asked to come directly to the company first before going to the ICO.
Yep.
And now that sounds like a gift, because you have the opportunity to deal with the question or the complaint or the concern, which sometimes is just, someone's frustration about something, or it's a misunderstanding, or it's a not reading of something clearly, or maybe the company hasn't expressed it in their terms and conditions clearly, or, it's something that can be dealt with. But if you don't deal with it properly, and if you don't have people on the pitch to deal with it properly who understand what they're dealing with, really, it's not so much a gift as a microscope for the regulator when that individual then goes to the regulator to see that you don't have the right processes in place. So I would say it's a policy change, it's a procedural change, but it's an accountability change, because ownership of these issues has to be clear within the organization, and training around how you deal with them has to be clear as well.
I think that, I mean, you're absolutely right, and you've touched on some really good points. Thank you, Janine, for opening that. Barry, what's your thoughts then from your perspective?
I agree with Janine. So as part of this process, we looked at our online policies and internal policies and procedures, right? And our policies have been written for both the UK and the EU. And so we've had to reword the complaints procedure at the bottom. So in the past, we always said, if you don't like the policies and our response, you're welcome to contact the ICO or the relevant authorities. Now we've reworded that so that the complaint initially has to come back to us. But for Europe, it's BAU. So now we're diverging from our one size kind of fits all process. But internally, we've done a lot of education and awareness, both to anybody who handles either customer or employee data. So whether it's a broker, a call center, HR, to recognize a complaint, a data protection complaint. So some people may complain because my billing or my payment's incorrect, and so we've clarified that's not a data protection complaint. It's about how and when we use your data. And one of the things that we did previously when we were implementing GDPR and over the years is looked at data minimization, and so we've cut back on surplus data that we don't have a legitimate reason for collecting or a strong business reason. So we don't foresee those types of complaints increasing. Similarly, on our website, we do a cookie rationalization every year to ensure that we're not collecting cookies from campaigns that are no longer valid, and people are going to complain about that. So we've tried to take as many of those pain points away. Where we do see complaints is, and it's probably common, is in relation to a DSAR. So we get DSARs, they don't like the response, and in the past, our DSAR response has always said, you're welcome to raise a complaint with the ICO. So we've had to readjust that to raise a complaint in the UK, come back and tell us exactly what your complaint is, and we will address it. We've got like a tracker that we use for all existing complaints or subject requests, rectification, corrections, data access requests, and in that we have a response or an acknowledgement. So we haven't changed our 30 days to acknowledge a request. We would still do that within our 3-day timeline, 72 hours we've got to acknowledge a request, and then we would enhance that throughout the process. So our goal internally is still to resolve this within 1 month, just like other DSARs or other requests. But we would always keep the individual abreast if it was going to take longer. So that's kind of how we've approached this.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. Two really good examples there from different organizations. Charlie, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, because you're obviously working with lots of different customers through the Dastra platform. You know, you must see customers have existing complaints procedures, but what do you think it needs to change in order for it to make it work properly with this new data protection requirement under the DUAA?
Well, with the people that we talk to, and I think in general, I think it's fair to say, if you don't have a complaints procedure of some kind, how serious are you as a business, right? And so because of that, I'm less worried about the B2B businesses, perhaps the people who are dealing with lower volumes of individuals. The people that I am worried about, the organizations that I am worried about, are the B2C organizations who are dealing with lots and lots of customers. Typically in those types of businesses, you have a small percentage that's going to be different from organization to organization that will raise a complaint. But is that going to be wrapped up with, is our data protection complaints going to be wrapped up with whatever other day-to-day complaints that an organization receives, right? And so that becomes less about what the documents say, what the policy, the procedure, having a log might say, and more about realistically embedding data protection within an organization, which I think, and talking to different DPOs, is a big challenge for some DPOs in being heard within like sales or marketing, or getting into like customer service type conversations. And there's heaps and heaps of examples of pretty egregious compliance failures when you look at some of the ICO fines, specifically PICCASO fines. The ICO is they're not fining on the basis of PICCASO breaches for like cookie infringements, right? They're fining for hundreds of thousands of unsolicited call scenarios. And that's where I'm most worried, where organizations might see, for lack of a better word, a compliance failure. I know that's a really strong way of putting it, but
no, I hear you, and I think that's the unique nature of your role, because you are dealing with lots of DPOs, so you get to hear, and they probably tell you their frustrations. So my next question, I'll start with
Janine, you're on mute.
I'll start with Janine.
I knew that was going to happen. Sorry, can I just add something to what Charlie was saying there? Which I think is worth remembering, especially for DPOs who are now trying to kind of work out, all right, we've got a complaints handling process. How do we build this in a way that it's streamlined in a way that they work together? Because you don't want parallel processes running with different people and different timelines, and they're never talking to each other, because the complaint might come in to the customer complaint handling team, and they need to be working. They need to know when to escalate it or move it to a different team. And I think one of the things, and Charlie touched on it, that sometimes it's hard for the DPO to get traction with the sales teams or the marketing teams. Is just to remember that a normal complaints handling process about billing, about service levels and stuff like that is different to a data protection complaint, principally because there are legal obligations around this one. It's not the same as somebody who investigates why your account wasn't switched off on a certain day and phones the person back. There are timelines, there's auditability obligations, there's the risk that the individual goes to a regulator, that you get called up in front of a regulator, that you have to be able to show that you have audit logs and what you have done. And so you essentially, you want to work hand in glove with the customer complaints or the HR team or the security team or whoever else, whatever, or the marketing team, because it might come in, as somebody mentioned, through a social media platform, the complaint that is. But you need to remember that ultimately you are trying to make sure that your process, which dovetails with all of this, meets legal obligations. And that's, I think, something important. When people hear the word complaint, they might think, oh, customer complaints can deal with that. well, maybe they can if they've got the right training and they know when to hand off for triage to another team. So just worth remembering that. And quite frankly, I think that's an important tool in a DPO or a legal team's arsenal when they have these conversations.
I like that, Janine. No, spot on, because what you're saying is you've got the legal stick, for want of a better word, to go and push through that change. And talking of change, Barry, so I mean, in your humble opinion, obviously you're part of PICCASO, so you network with various different data protection officers. Where in your opinion are most organizations, where are they most exposed? What is it, that lack of process or the lack of accountability and clear ownership? What is it? What is it? The poor speed to response? Is it? What do you think, in your humble opinion?
I think it's recognizing that this is a data protection complaint. As Janine said, we get lots of complaints for different aspects. And so we've rolled out some training and awareness, as I said. One of the things that I find, though, is once something has the word data in it, it automatically gets flagged and escalated. So, people have been living with GDPR now for 8 years. We've drilled into them the importance of handling personal data and so forth over this time. So I think people will escalate and percolate things up to me. Sometimes it may or may not be relevant, but I think we've got good communication going. So that's key, is making sure that you're visible and you've got communication and people know where to go if there is such a complaint. And then we can discuss, no, this is not regarding personal data. This is a billing or whatnot account issue. Or is it something that we need to handle and formalize through our complaints process? So, with the FCA, we've been super sensitive around just overall complaints for a number of years. So I think people are, at least in financial services, hyper aware about complaints, and whether it's a billing account or it's a data complaint. I think people are aware it needs to be raised and escalated, and so I walk around the office and I speak to the people in HR who manage complaints or get issues from the business, and so they're well aware. This is an example of a complaint that needs to be raised to us. I think this is common across, especially medium and small organizations, where that visibility of the privacy team is so important, that you can go around and you can meet the head of HR, the head of client servicing, and so forth to recognize complaints and drill in this information. I've attended some lunch and learns over the year within our own team, and again, we talk about various aspects of data protection and complaints, and the DUAA Act is one of those areas. We've got a separate conversation because, as I said, we also have a business in Europe, so it's slightly nuanced, but we try to keep the processes as harmonized as possible. And so this is one area where we've kind of diverged, because the business in Europe doesn't have this responsibility, and they don't want that obligation at this point.
It's interesting. Oh, sorry, Jenny. Yeah, go on. You.
As the only lady on the panel, I'm going to be butting in all over the place. So fair warning, but I totally agree with what Barry said, and I would add this point that he was making around understanding when this is actually a data issue is really important. Because if you said to a marketing team, when they receive a message that says, "Why are you still sending me marketing? I told you to stop," they will think that's a marketing message. That's their CRM database message. They won't necessarily think, unless they've received proper training, that actually there's a data protection issue here, or there's something that could blow up and become a data protection issue. So I think that's quite important. I would also add that your logging your complaints is critical. You currently, most companies, I think, have probably got, particularly if you're receiving a fair amount of them, case management tools to deal with logging complaints logging DSARs. But complaints also data complaints also need to be logged, and that's your evidence. Now, if you might be an organization that gets maybe 10 a year, so you use a SharePoint site or something simple, but no evidence, no logs, no evidence, and that becomes an issue if the regulator comes knocking, or if the individual decides to escalate this. So I would just add that to Barry's points as well.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. Sorry, Barry, did you want to?
I was going to say we're talking about marketing not seeing a data protection complaint as a complaint. I think the same goes for sales, especially salespeople who cold call. They might see a complaint as like a sales objection rather than someone exercising their right. And it's laughable, but someone who works in an organization where data protection compliance isn't embedded a little bit or at all, they won't know, and that's not on them. But it does happen. Yeah. I'm not saying it could happen. I'm saying it does happen.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very good point. I think what we've just been addressing here is the fact that this is quite complex, right? It sounds straightforward, you've got different ways to capture this, first of all, different case management tools, as you said, different processes from different departments, customer services, sales, HR. And what I was interested about was, because of your global role, Barry, that you've got this kind of oxymoron, because, on one hand, you've got to make sure that this is all great and in place for the UK, but elsewhere that must be really hard sell. Right?
It was, and again, we try to keep things harmonized across the globe as much as we can, but the business doesn't want us to over-engineer. Resources are limited. We've got privacy champions in these countries, but we don't want to over-engineer a process that isn't necessarily required, right? Because in Ireland, for instance, they can just complain right away after you get your response, right? They don't need to come back to the company to complain, right? So we've got those kind of divergence in rules and regulations. But we do try, so like I say, we've got this tracker in place, and we try to, acknowledge within our 72 hours and respond within one month, regardless. But some of these complaints are tricky, and some of the complaints, you get a complaint on the response to your complaint, right? So we've got some, I'll call them serial complainers, and they're just not going to be happy regardless, right? They feel
irrespective.
They've been hard done by in one way or another. They think we've got data that we're withholding, perhaps, or something like that, right? And they're just kind of going around. So we've got, that where they've complained, they've done an access request, they've complained, we've responded to the complaint, they're still not happy, they're complaining again. So we've got some of this that goes on, and we treat those as a new complaint. And what we've done is, in any of our responses, we also think of the regulator. So is this person going to show this to a regulator? So would this be clear to a regulator that we've responded to their issue, we've clarified, we've done all we can, we're not withholding any information, we're being very transparent, knowing that they're going to forward this to or assuming that they could forward this to the regulator and say, they're not responding, or they're not providing me the information I require.
So, I mean, you've perfectly teed up. So, Janine, what does good look like? That is just the killer question, right?
I think it. I'm going to try and keep this short, so I could go on about this for the rest of the session. But I think you've got to think about it in stages. First is receiving the complaint and making sure that you are thinking through all of the different places where that complaint could come in, and ideally training people at that pinch point. And Barry touched on a bunch of really good things that he does in his organization, and I agree with all of them, from meeting different heads of departments, doing lunch and learns, walking around looking at what's going on. I also think something you can do is understand how that business unit works and create almost a set of FAQs or questions for them. Does it have this information in it? Is it this kind of question? And you could create that little, you could laminate it, or you could put it somewhere on a intranet or somewhere that, if they sit in cubicles, it's there in the cubicle, it's at the coffee machine, it's so that they start thinking in their different sales department, marketing department, HR department, oh, if I see that, then I need to speak to that group. They don't have to become experts in this area. They just need to know when to send it to someone, because that's one of the biggest problems. It's just not getting to the person it should get to in time. And I think we've probably all had experience of that. Then I think that the triage piece, and I liked what Barry said as well around, there's 30 days to acknowledge receipt, and the clock starts the day after you've received it. And he said, I think you said, Barry, 72 hours is what you try and use to just acknowledge receipt. And I think that's really important. Now, obviously, if it takes 29 days to get to you, then it's a scramble, so getting it to you is important. Then I think prompt acknowledgement is important. And something else Barry mentioned, which I also think is really good practice, is keeping the channel of communication going with the person, because this complaints process allows you up to, depending on the complexity of the complaint, how many systems you have to look at, how many people you have to talk to, how long it might take to investigate it. It can give you up to 3 months to respond. But you don't want to respond, say, thank you, we got your note in 72 hours. And then they don't hear from you for weeks. Because as Barry also mentioned, you have some people who literally, this is the thing that fires them up each morning. So if they don't hear from you, that's going to make it worse. Whereas if they think you're actually taking them seriously, you will win points for that. I think the investigation is really important. Making sure that you, so you've obviously got the receipt, this kind of triage phase and acknowledgement. Then you've got an investigation phase. Where you look into what has actually gone on. You answer to the best of your ability, but do not be scared to say, if this is not, if you're not happy with this, you can go to the ICO, and there's no obligation on you to tell them you can go to the ICO, but don't be scared to do that. And I think historically I have seen often where you have perhaps more junior case handling managers or people who haven't been doing it for a long time, they're so worried about the person going to the ICO. Look, if you've done everything that you could, you should have no concern in sending it to the ICO. And then I think taking the time to look at, and this is again where having a process that is either automated or a good case management tool, or even if you have a SharePoint tool, go back every now and then. And I used to do this on a monthly basis. I would get a report. In fact, I'd get a report weekly for some things, but I'd get a comprehensive report monthly, because there were so many DSARs, complaints, etc. coming in. And try, particularly now with AI, you can run analytics on this and work out where are most of these coming from? Which ones have the biggest delays in being able to deal with them? Does that tell me something about that business unit? Does that business unit need more training, or is that just a byproduct of the nature of what they do? Is there a tool that we should be putting in place or a change in the process in that business unit that will help? And is there something going on here that we need to escalate to management? So when the DPO or the head of legal or the head of compliance or the head of risk is reporting and doing board reports or exec committee reports, is there a point at which there's something going on here that we need to flag? And maybe it's because you need some budget next time around to address it. Maybe it's a spike in something, but do you need to flag this upwards at all? So I would say make sure you're looking at lessons learned, particularly for those who are dealing with thousands of these. Okay, now I'm going to stop for a little bit. Let some others go.
But Janine, you raise a good point. about avoiding escalations and avoiding the complaint, right? So that's what we've also seen. It's done some analysis of what are the complaints we're receiving, and is there something we should be doing at the front end to avoid this becoming a complaint, and to avoid aggravating the client, customer, or employee, right? So we've done some of that as well. So hopefully through that process, we are smart enough to kind of reduce these from actually becoming a complaint. So we've got some processes in place that we've added for clarifying upfront how we use, or what type of data that we're collecting, why do we need to collect it, and how we do it. So we've got some of that. This is why we collect this information, so it doesn't get escalated to a complaint.
Charlie, I was conscious that you were about to speak.
I was too excited.
Yeah.
No, two things from what you said, Janine. I think the communicating on timelines and staying in communication with people who've raised a complaint, really, really important piece. I think there's something psychological where if you're standing on the platform and you're waiting for a train, there's a lot less anxiety if you know when the train is going to come, right? Whether that's in 15 minutes or in 2 minutes. And I think that's quite important to say, realistically speaking, expect to hear back from me, even with just we're working on it by this time next week, or within 2 weeks, or by the end of the month, whatever that might be. I think on the other side is a little bit going off of what you said, is what, in the first place, what pushes someone to raise a data protection complaint? And that's going off of what you said in reporting upwards. Do we need to report upwards? Because, I mean, we're data protection professionals. What would push you to raise a data protection complaint? Either you see something, or you are pretty annoyed at that company for something, right? So people who, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, people who aren't data protection experts, it's the same. Maybe they're just using ChatGPT to help them out. They're really annoyed with the company, and they're saying, how can I get back at this company? It used to be just an access request or an erasure request. Now it's a complaint of some kind, whether it's legitimate or not.
And I would also add, and again, Barry did touch on this, sometimes people use these processes, and I think for those of us who've worked in this space, we're accustomed to people using the DSAR process as a pre-litigation tactic, and they're lawyers using it.
Yeah.
Be aware that now the complaints process can also lead to litigation, and it could be a lawyer that has said to the individual, put a complaint in and see if they address it, because if they don't address it, or they don't recognize it as a data complaint, we have another hook to get them on. So yeah, just be aware of that.
Thank you. I think this is really good. There was a question that I'd like to ask around boards' expectations. But before I come on to that question, we've got a question here from Adrian Lung. If it is the same Adrian, then nice to see you, Adrian. His question was, the complaints definitions is actually unclear, which I agree. So how do we, as DPOs, distinguish between a complaint and an individual rights request? I suppose it goes a little bit back to what you were both saying, Barry, Janine, about culture, champions, communication. But is there anything definitive that you want to say on that?
I suppose the two major, so individual rights requests, we're more familiar with them because we know it's access to people's information, a request to rectify information, a request to delete information. So I think we're all comfortable. We should be comfortable more or less with what that is. I think a complaint is where somebody is saying the company has breached GDPR, and it's more backward looking. They've done something that has breached GDPR, and it's dissatisfaction with the company for doing that. So it's broader than the individual rights request. It's, individual rights is the individual can only ask for things that pertain to themselves and say, you need to give me my data. Whereas the complaint can be, you have breached GDPR because you have done X, Y, and Z, and that is counter to what GDPR is about. And And as a result, also, this is what also makes it quite tricky when you come to sales teams and marketing teams and HR, is that someone might not have meant to raise a complaint under GDPR, but by making the allegations they're making, it is, yes, it's an HR complaint, or it's a marketing complaint, or it's a sales complaint, but it's also a breach of GDPR. And this is where those teams are definitely going to have to work a lot closer, and with the training, and you're going to have to think through, okay, typically what are the things that come into this team, the sales team, the complaints team, the marketing team, the HR team. Of those, the following are rights requests, because we've typically used to seeing them. But are there typical sorts of things that come in which actually have been dealt with by HR in the past, and only when it's blown up later has someone gone, oh, that could have a GDPR angle, or, oh, their lawyer's now alleging it has a GDPR angle and it's now doubly cross with us. Also remember that often, and I used to get a lot of these, the complaint might come in via a very senior executive, because the individual might have decided, you know, I'm so cross with what that company has been doing. I'm going to write to the CEO. And then they allege all kinds of things, and they threaten to go to the papers, and etc. But actually, you know, and it kind of, it used to come to me because I was kind of the kitchen sink for lots of stuff. So I would be able to work out, oh gosh, there's a GDPR angle here as well. But that might not always happen. So you've got to think about the fact that that complaint now, which it might not say GDPR in it, might not even say the words data, but when you look at the complaint, it covers a breach of GDPR. I hope that is a little bit helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. Did you want to come in on that, Barry or Charlie? If not, I've got a question here that I'm keen to ask.
Go ahead.
No. Okay.
Go for it.
So I think one of the things, being a DPO myself, one of the challenges is kind of, we've sort of touched on it a little bit about reporting, etc., and managing expectations. But one of the challenges is around what boards should be asking, what execs and excuse me, senior leaders should be asking on knowing whether their organization and their data protection officers and privacy functions are actually ready for this. What's your thoughts on what the board or senior execs should be asking us, because we can actually use that to turn that round and drive change through. But what for our audience, it was a couple of hundred of you, what would you say was the advice would you give our privacy professionals listening in today? So who wants? Barry?
Yeah, good question. So I think the way I approached it was, I get limited action with the interaction with the board. And so what I try to do is feed up any type of change or requirements in legislation ahead of time. So I can say, this is what this means. I've got it covered, right? Or I need this support. So I've already gone to senior management to filter up these requirements so that they wouldn't be surprised that, because not all the board members are going to understand what the nuances of this complaint versus a previous complaint under GDPR, right? So I've just reassured them, I've got this under consideration. We're working on a plan. We've got something in development. We've got it handled, right? So they don't have to worry about it. And then as part of my ongoing reporting, both to risk committees, to senior executives, they see this trend and this evolution of, Barry raised this in September, he's got a plan in place, and it's now enacted because he's updated the policies, he's updated the procedures, and he's reached out to various people for training and awareness.
Can I add one a little bit to that? I love what Barry said. In my experience, boards are way more worried about the share price, what's impacting that, geopolitical issues, all of those things. But what they do want, and their time is precious, as Barry's alluded to, and so nobody ever gets enough of their time. But they typically want the short version. They want to know, what is the issue? What is the risk? What are you doing about it? And do you need anything from us?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then you report it back later to tell them how that's going. So, yeah.
No.
Agree with everything you just said, Janine. The only thing that I would add is, do you need any help?
Yeah, so that was
Do you
my
need any
fourth
help?
one.
Do you need
What do
any
you need from us?
resource?
Yes. What do you need from us?
Are you already strained? If you are already strained, do you need some time from someone in legal or someone in compliance? Or is this the trigger point where we bring in an external consultant on a retainer, or bring in an extra pair of hands for the more remedial stuff, or onboard a tool, whatever that might be, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Steve, I don't know if you've seen, there's another question in the chat. Should I just quickly grab it?
Go ahead. Is it the... Yes, please.
How detailed does the final response to the complaint need to be? Look, I think we're in the early stages here, but I think what you have to be able to do is, if this goes to the ICO, be able to demonstrate you took it seriously. So you should be reporting back to the person to show them what you found, what action you've taken, if any, and that they have a right to escalate it to the ICO, bare minimum. Obviously, the more you can put in there there's a bit of guesswork here. Why are they asking this? Is there, if you can, what's driving it? So I would try and frame it in a way that is pleasant and helpful, but ultimately you have to be able to demonstrate, as Barry said, you're kind of often writing this because the ICO is going to look at it, to explain what you found, what action you're taking, if any, and telling them that they've got the right to go to the ICO. But I would use some business psychology in how you answer these things.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question. But I think the other question that's been on my mind, which I was asked by my GC recently to do a 3-year roadmap. So obviously this was in the roadmap, but I just wondered from our guests what AI role has to play. I know you alluded to it, Janine, but are we seeing the use of AI to help do this at scale? And obviously then there's a question about quality and, tools, etc. But AI. So Barry, what in terms of your thinking around this, and how much would AI play a role in this? Because it sounds like from everything we've heard so far, there's an awful lot of interpretation, right? Because what's a complaint? What's just an individual rights request? Where's that balance kind of test? Is it proportionate, and all those kind of good things? But what I'm just intrigued about the sort of use of AI, because it was certainly on my roadmap, but I slight digression, but to this point about building this out.
So definitely over the last year or so, we've seen some data subject access requests and other requests coming through that have obviously been written by AI, because they're much more detailed and granular than what we've seen in the past. I want all my data, and so forth. So we've seen that already come to fruition. I think with similar with complaints, right? We will see that they're much more detailed, quoting various legislations and so forth, right? This is why I'm entitled to this information. You have to give it to me, and I know that you have to give it to me within a month, and so forth, right? What I've also seen, and we haven't done it yet, but I've seen AI requests come in, and then the companies use AI to respond to it, and so you've got this back and forth where nobody's actually speaking anymore, right? So, the requester has gone into Claude or ChatGPT and said, "I'm unhappy, write a complaint." Then the company's written back and saying, analyze this complaint and respond to it. Obviously the DPO would review it, because there's always human in the loop, right? But so we're seeing that kind of. I've seen that as some examples. We haven't done it so far in that regard, but you're going to get this bouncing back and forth. Well, that's not what I want, right? And it's AI talking to AI, right? I don't know if anybody else has experienced similar.
Yeah, I think no, completely agree with your point. With data subject access requests in particular that are written by AI, some good points and a lot of fluff that is completely irrelevant. But you have to you have to read it all. You have to respond to it all in some way, even if you're just analyzing it to disregard the statement. And I think we'll see that with complaints.
Yeah.
I haven't used AI to do the following things, but I have thought about the following things. And I've thought AI could help with the following things. So I think testing the system and the process is always a really important thing to do. And typically you would get your assurance team to check what is actually happening. And historically, we've done this around individual rights, around DSARs, for example. And I think AI was starting to be used to, if you had a DSAR which had tons and tons of documents, a first triage of the documents could be done by AI. Obviously, you'd still need to look at it and think about, has it pulled everything from the different systems? Because that's where it's brilliant, pulling stuff from systems, analyzing it, provided you've written the right prompts to find the right stuff. Because we've all probably lived through, a weekend in the office with 10 people all sitting there reading every document and editing stuff out. But hopefully with AI, we've moved beyond that. And so if we can use that in a DSAR type situation, we should be able to use it with complaints. And what I have thought is that one has to remember that the DPO sits at the second line, and you've got people sitting at the first line who really should be trained to be your first point of call, who are the ones who are first responders. And a lot of DPOs have first responders who report up to them in some way, but operate almost as a first line, recognizing that this is a data-related issue, triaging it a bit, sending it then to the right teams. So that DPO sitting at the second line needs to own the process. And if you can use AI and AI agents to help you own that process, you become less of a bottleneck and you run better second line assurance. So if you could use AI agents to test the process. So if you say to an AI agent, okay, we have a policy now, we have processes to deal with complaints, which have to work alongside individual rights and the company's general complaints processes. Test it for me. Yeah. The AI agent could send different kinds of questions in through the websites, through chatbots, through the HR team, through the DPO's office, and just check on whether or not the process is running properly. So I thought, I've not tried this, but I thought that could be done. And I think it would help audit teams as well to be able to kind of do a quick assessment of compliance. And I think, remember, one of the things you're also checking is to try and see whether or not, and maybe it's like a sheep dip test, the complaints that are coming in to the complaints team, the business complaints team, are they actually identifying when it's a data issue or not? And an AI agent could be checking on that. Is it getting escalated? Is it not? Are things slipping through the net? These are just some thoughts.
No, I like it. And sadly,
Charlie's taking notes, and he's got a new business plan.
So, sadly, we're running out of time. So I'm going to draw it to a close. But I just before I do, I wanted to ask you, each of you, is there one kind of practical, it might be more than one, action that our audience can take away from today? What would that be? And just as a reminder, because I was taking notes, we talked about sort of knowing where these complaints are coming in and making sure we can respond to them. We talked therefore about the triage and the piece that touches into your champions and your network and your difference between first line and second line. We talked about the comms and the channel and how we communicate back with the customers. I thought that was a really good point. We talked very much about the investigation capability, capacity that we've got, because in my experience, that's often a bit of a bottleneck, because you're, as a DPO, you're relying on someone in IT, or you're relying on someone in customer services to actually do the deep dive, and all the time the clock's ticking. So that investigation capability. We talked also about case management tools, or just platforms that can enable this to do it at scale, so that we don't become a bottleneck or any particular part of the process. We talked about using AI as a potential way to enable that or to facilitate that. And to your points, Janine, is this something that is just going to make us much more efficient and effective? And then coming towards the end here, we then talked about testing, which was bang on, sheep dip testing, you called it, I think. But I do agree. I think testing, audit, third line is a great way to test that, but also to walk through all of those testing procedures, actually run through those scenarios. I found that really helpful when I arrived at my previous place to do a run through with that complaints procedure. And then finally, something that's been pervasive across all of this discussion the last hour is around culture. So how do we change the hearts and minds and get people to think differently, going back to that principle of accountability and ownership? So, and that's really come through. So I'll just go round the virtual table. I'll start with you, Charlie. What's your one, if you're in that elevator,
the key take this, okay.
What would
the
you say
elevator pitch key takeaway?
Yes, please.
Documentation is the easy part. The hard part is embedding data protection within the business. So be closer to your customer service team, your sales team, your marketing team. Make sure that they know how to identify a data protection complaint versus whatever other type of complaint that they receive. What to do, how to escalate it, who to talk to.
What, where, why, when, who? Brilliant. How? Yes, we nearly got there for 5 W's. Okay, so Barry, let's have your snippet of wisdom.
I agree with Charlie. I think it's the easy part is to update your policies and your documentation. I think the one thing I would suggest is to go around and talk to the various customer, employee, client-facing teams to ensure that they know and understand and recognize what a complaint is, and to ensure that they escalate to you as quickly as possible.
Marvelous. Janine,
Too quick.
You started, so you
When
finished.
I say quick, it's always it's misleading normally. But
you got 60 seconds.
Okay. So testing. I'm just going to add, because Barry and Charlie have already covered all the other points. Testing. Be your own mystery shopper. You go and fire off some and see what happens. Does your whole process and the policy and everything you've done actually work? And then one other thing I wanted to add to the question that I answered around how detailed does your final response have to be is I gave the baseline, but just be careful. You in your efforts to be so super helpful, don't actually give more than you need, which could all come back and blow back at you. So just that's one last little thought that I thought should be mentioned.
Brilliant. Listen, thank you ever so much. Barry, Janine, Charlie, thank you for a fantastic panel this afternoon. I'm Steve Wright, signing off as your host. It's been a great talk on the DUAA compliance that's in force now here in the UK. So a big thanks to Dastra, our sponsors here at PICCASO today for this webinar. And just a reminder for your diaries. So we've got the 15th of September is the alfresco night, evenings. We've got some special guests coming up there. And of course, don't forget the PICCASO Awards on the 2nd of December this year, where you can nominate yourselves, your team, or your product and services. So without further ado, thank you so much. And it's goodbye from us here. Thank you. Bye-bye.